The ancient ceremonial bells of Haven's rest station rang out across the void, their deep tones carrying through the metal corridors and into the vastness of space beyond. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the Treaty of Stellar Winds, and the galaxy celebrated with a collective sigh of relief that had become as familiar as breathing. The war was over, the killing had stopped. Peace had finally come to stay. Ambassador Thek adjusted his ceremonial robes as he walked through the station's central hub. His 4 arms moved with practiced grace, each gesture carrying the weight of tradition and the promise of tomorrow. The Alteron diplomat had spent decades fighting the Corvan Federation, watching worlds burn and fleets shatter against each other like waves against stone. But that was history now. The treaty had held for 5 years, and both sides had learned to live with something they had almost forgotten: hope. Across the station, Chancellor Voss prepared for the anniversary ceremony with equal solemnity. Her serpentine form coiled around the meditation chamber as she performed the ritual cleansing required by Corvan law. The psychic scars of war still ran deep through her people's collective consciousness, but they were healing. Trade was flourishing. Scientists from both species worked together on projects that would have been impossible during the war. Children were being born who would never know the fear of enemy fleets darkening their skies. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic balance. Representatives from 17 different species had gathered to witness the renewal of peace, each bringing their own traditions and hopes for the future. The Alteron Honor Guard stood at attention beside their Corvan counterparts, former enemies now united in their commitment to preventing another war. The speeches were formal but heartfelt, speaking of sacrifice and redemption, of lessons learned and wounds healed. Dr. Ann Foster would have found the ceremony fascinating if she had been there to witness it. Instead, she was 3 sectors away, aboard the exploration vessel Wanderer, analyzing strange energy readings that had appeared on their long-range sensors. The readings were unlike anything in the human database, suggesting technology far beyond anything Earth's colonies had encountered in their expansion across the outer rim. Ray Wells studied the data with growing excitement. The human captain had spent most of his career mapping empty systems and cataloging dead worlds, but these readings suggested something extraordinary. 2 massive civilizations apparently at peace with technology that seemed both familiar and utterly alien. The energy signatures were consistent with advanced spacefaring cultures, but the patterns were unlike anything in human records. Engineer Tom Blake ran diagnostic after diagnostic, convinced that their instruments were malfunctioning. The readings showed defense networks, communication relays, and massive space installations that implied civilizations spanning hundreds of star systems. If the data was accurate, humanity had stumbled upon something that would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. The decision to investigate was unanimous. The Wanderer altered course toward the energy signatures, its crew preparing for humanity's first contact with advanced alien civilization. They had protocols for this situation, developed by Earth's finest diplomats and scientists, but no one had expected to use them so far from home. The outer rim was supposed to be empty, a vast frontier waiting for human exploration and colonization. As the Wanderer approached the source of the readings, the crew began to understand the scope of what they had discovered. The energy signatures belonged to a network of border stations, each one larger than Earth's biggest space dock. The stations were clearly military in nature, but they showed no signs of active conflict. Instead, they seemed to be monitoring each other with the patient watchfulness of former enemies learning to trust. Ray made the decision that would change galactic history. Instead of retreating to report their findings to Earth Command, he chose to make contact immediately. The opportunity was too important to waste, and the aliens' apparent peaceful coexistence suggested they might be receptive to diplomatic overtures. He ordered the communications array activated and began broadcasting standard first contact protocols on all frequencies. The response was immediate and alarming. Both sets of border stations went to high alert simultaneously, their defensive systems powering up as automated warnings flooded the communication channels. The Wanderer found itself caught between 2 suspicious alien powers, each demanding to know which side had sent the unknown vessel into their territory. Dr. Foster worked frantically to establish meaningful communication as the situation deteriorated around them. The Universal Translator struggled with the complex alien languages, but gradually patterns began to emerge. The two civilizations were the Alteran Empire and the Corvan Federation, former enemies who had recently signed a peace treaty. Each side was convinced that the other was using the human ship as some kind of test or provocation. Tom Blake monitored the tactical situation with growing concern. Both sides were mobilizing their fleets, and the peaceful border stations were transforming into potential battlegrounds. The human ship was fast but lightly armed, no match for the massive alien vessels that were beginning to converge on their position. More importantly, their arrival seemed to be triggering exactly the kind of incident that could shatter the fragile peace. Ray realized that humanity's first contact with alien civilization had become something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The aliens' peace was younger and more fragile than it appeared, built on mutual exhaustion rather than genuine trust. The arrival of an unknown third party had awakened old fears and suspicions that had been dormant but never truly dead. As emergency sessions convened on both sides of the border, Ray faced an impossible choice. He could retreat and report the situation to Earth Command, leaving the aliens to sort out their own problems, or he could stay and try to prevent the peace from collapsing, risking his ship and crew in a conflict that humanity had never asked to join. The decision was made for him when both alien powers demanded that he choose sides. The Alterans offered protection in exchange for intelligence about Corvan capabilities. The Corvans promised rich rewards for information about Alteran weaknesses. Neither side seemed willing to accept that the humans were neutral parties seeking peaceful contact. Ray looked out at the stars and made his choice. Humanity had spent centuries dreaming of the day they would meet other intelligent species. Now that the moment had arrived, he would not let it be destroyed by fear and misunderstanding. The Wanderer would stay, and somehow they would find a way to prove that peace was possible for all of them. The emergency klaxons had been sounding for 3 hours straight when Admiral Deck finally silenced them with a gesture of his upper right arm. The Alteran Command Center fell into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the soft hum of tactical displays and the nervous shuffling of junior officers. Everyone knew what the silence meant. The peace was breaking. High above the planet's surface, orbital defense platforms tracked the mysterious vessel that had appeared from nowhere. The ship's design was unlike anything in the Alteran archives, sleek and purposeful in a way that suggested advanced military engineering. Its energy signature was equally puzzling, showing technology that seemed to blend elements from both Alteran and Corvan science in impossible ways. Chancellor Voss coiled around her command throne, her serpentine form tense with barely controlled anger. The Corvan War Council had been debating for hours, their psychic voices creating a low buzz of mental static that made concentration difficult. The appearance of the unknown vessel had triggered every defensive instinct their species possessed, and the resemblance to certain classified Alteran prototypes was too obvious to ignore. The human ship Wanderer drifted in the neutral zone, its crew unaware of the storm they had unleashed. Ray Wells studied the alien response with growing concern. Both sides had deployed battle fleets that dwarfed anything in human space, their weapon systems powered up and ready for conflict. The careful balance of the peace treaty was crumbling. Before his eyes, Dr. Foster worked through the night, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she tried to decode the alien communication protocols. The Universal Translator was making progress, but the process was agonizingly slow. Each breakthrough revealed new layers of complexity, hidden meanings, and cultural references that would take years to fully understand. Time was running out, and the margin for error was shrinking with each passing hour. The first breakthrough came when Foster managed to establish a basic vocabulary link with the Alteran communication systems. The messages were formal and suspicious, demanding identification and proof of peaceful intentions. But beneath the diplomatic language she could sense something deeper: fear. The Alterans were terrified that the Corvins had developed some new weapon or strategy that would give them an advantage in a renewed war. Tom Blake monitored the tactical situation from the engineering station, his displays showing the massive alien fleets maneuvering for position. The Alteran ships were built like Mogul fortresses, bristling with weapons and armor plating that could withstand planetary bombardment. The Corvan vessels were sleeker and more organic, their biotech hulls pulsing with energy that seemed almost alive. Ray made the decision to divide his efforts, opening separate communication channels with both sides simultaneously. The risk was enormous. If either side discovered he was talking to their enemies, they might attack immediately. But it was the only way to convince them that humanity was neutral in their ancient conflict. The conversation with Admiral Vec was formal and cautious. The Alteran commander spoke in clipped sentences, his words chosen carefully to avoid revealing military secrets. He wanted to know everything about human capabilities, their fleet strength, their homeworlds, and their intentions. The underlying message was clear: prove you are not working with our enemies, or face the consequences. Chancellor Voss approached the situation differently, her psychic abilities allowing her to sense the emotional undercurrents beneath Ray's words. She probed gently at first, testing for deception or hidden loyalties. The human mind was unlike anything she had encountered, lacking the telepathic networks that connected all Corvan thoughts, but possessing a strange resilience that made it difficult to read. Foster's linguistic analysis revealed a troubling pattern. Both sides were using the same words to describe the unknown ship, but their meanings were completely different. The Alterans saw it as a Corvan infiltration vessel, while the Corvans believed it was an Alteran secret weapon. The translation software was accurate, but the cultural context was creating dangerous misunderstandings. The situation deteriorated when both sides began demanding that the human ship submit to boarding and inspection. The Alterans wanted to examine the vessel's technology for evidence of Corvan collaboration. The Corvans insisted on conducting psychic scans of the crew to detect any mental conditioning or false memories. Neither side was willing to accept Ray's explanations about human independence. Blake discovered that the alien fleets were implementing a complex encirclement pattern designed to trap the human ship between two converging forces. The tactical display showed dozens of possible escape routes, but each one led through heavily defended space that would be impossible to navigate without superior firepower. The Wanderer was fast but lightly armed, no match for the massive alien dreadnoughts. Ray realized that words alone would not be enough to convince either side of humanity's peaceful intentions. Both civilizations were trapped in a mindset that recognized only two possibilities: ally or enemy. The concept of a neutral third party was foreign to their experience, incompatible with the binary thinking that had driven their conflict for centuries. The breakthrough came when Dr. Foster suggested a radical approach. Instead of trying to prove human independence through diplomacy, they would demonstrate it through action. Ray authorized the transmission of human cultural materials, music, art, literature, and historical records that would be impossible to fake or replicate. If the aliens could study human civilization directly, they might finally understand the truth. The response was immediate and unexpected. Both sides began analyzing the cultural transmissions with intense interest, their xenobiologists and historians working around the clock to decode the alien information. The materials were clearly genuine, showing a complex civilization with its own unique history and development. But instead of resolving the situation, the evidence only deepened the mystery. The Alterans concluded that the humans were a Corvan creation, genetically modified and given false memories to serve as perfect spies. The Corvans reached the opposite conclusion, convinced that the humans were Alteran agents surgically altered to appear as an independent species. Each side found evidence to support their theory while dismissing anything that contradicted it. Admiral Vec called an emergency session of the Alteran High Command, his report painting a picture of unprecedented Corvan treachery. The enemy had somehow created an entirely new species, complete with its own technology and culture, for the sole purpose of infiltrating Alteran space. The implications were staggering. If the Corvins could do this, what other deceptions might they be planning? Chancellor Voss reached a similar conclusion about Alteron capabilities. Her psychic scans revealing what she believed to be carefully constructed mental barriers, designed to hide the human's true nature. The level of sophistication required for such an operation suggested that the Alterons had been planning this deception for decades, possibly since the treaty was signed. Ray watched helplessly as the situation spun out of control. Every attempt to prove human independence only convinced both sides that the other was more devious and dangerous than they had imagined. The peace treaty was crumbling, and the galaxy was sliding toward a war that would be even more destructive than the last one. The final blow came when both sides detected massive fleet movements across the border. The Alterons were mobilizing their reserve squadrons while the Corvins were activating their psychic warfare divisions. The careful balance of deterrence that had maintained the peace was breaking down. Replaced by the familiar logic of preemptive strike and overwhelming force, Foster made one last desperate attempt to reach both sides through the communication channels, but her words were lost in the growing chorus of war preparations. The galaxy was about to tear itself apart, and humanity had become the unwitting catalyst for its own destruction. The neutral station Haven's Rest had never felt so empty. The diplomatic quarters that had housed peace negotiations for 5 years now echoed with the footsteps of skeleton crews and automated systems. Most of the civilian population had been evacuated when the crisis began, leaving behind only essential personnel and the three-way delegation that would decide the fate of galactic civilization. Ray Wells walked through the station's central hub with slow, measured steps. The artificial gravity felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Around him, the station's architecture told the story of failed diplomacy, conference rooms where treaties had been signed, memorial walls honoring the dead of past wars, and viewing ports that looked out on space lanes that would soon be filled with warships. Ambassador Thek stood before the great window of Conference Room 7, his forearms clasped behind his back in the formal pose of Alteron mourning. The view showed the distant glow of his home fleet. Dozens of massive vessels arranged in attack formation just beyond the neutral zone. Each ship carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet, and their commanders were awaiting his signal to begin the final war. Chancellor Voss occupied the opposite side of the room, her serpentine form coiled around a meditation platform that had been specially constructed for the peace negotiations. Her psychic abilities allowed her to sense the emotions of everyone in the room, and the mixture of fear, anger, and desperation was almost overwhelming. The Corvin battle fleet hung in space like a living weapon, its biotech hulls pulsing with contained fury. Dr. Foster had prepared for this moment with the thoroughness of a scientist facing her final experiment. Her data tablets contained every scrap of information about human history, culture, and biology that could be transmitted in compressed form. The genetic samples had been analyzed and reanalyzed, the cultural artifacts authenticated through multiple independent sources. If this evidence could not prove human independence, nothing would. The presentation began with the basics: star charts showing the location of Earth and its colonies, far beyond the borders of either empire. The data was comprehensive and detailed, showing centuries of human expansion and development that had occurred independently of the galactic conflict. But instead of acceptance, the evidence was met with skepticism and suspicion. Thek studied the star charts with the eye of a military strategist, noting the strategic positioning of human colonies and the obvious advantages such locations would provide for intelligence gathering. The humans claimed their expansion was driven by curiosity and resource needs, but the pattern looked remarkably similar to the way the Corvins had established their own spy networks during the war. Voss examined the genetic data with equal suspicion, her psychic abilities allowing her to detect subtle patterns that would be invisible to normal senses. The human DNA was certainly unique, showing no signs of Alteron genetic manipulation, but the Corvins had developed sophisticated bioengineering techniques that could produce similar results. The evidence was consistent but not conclusive. Blake demonstrated human technology with the patience of a teacher addressing skeptical students. Each device was disassembled and examined, its components analyzed for hidden functions or concealed capabilities. The technology was impressive but not revolutionary, showing clear signs of independent development but also suspicious similarities to both. Ultron and Corvin Science. Ray attempted to explain the convergent evolution of technology, how similar problems would naturally produce similar solutions among different species, but his words fell on deaf ears. Both sides were convinced that the similarities were evidence of espionage rather than independent innovation. The more proof he provided, the more suspicious they became. The breaking point came when Foster presented the crown jewel of her evidence, a complete recording of human history from the first civilizations through the space age. The data was massive and comprehensive, showing the gradual development of human culture and technology over thousands of years. No deception could be this elaborate or this consistent. Vec watched the historical recordings with growing amazement and horror. The humans had fought wars that made the Alteron-Corvin conflict look like a minor skirmish. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire worlds, then learn to control them. They had created artificial intelligences, explored the deepest oceans, and reached for the stars with single-minded determination. If this was a Corvan creation, it was the most sophisticated lie ever told. Voss probed deeper into the historical data, her psychic abilities allowing her to sense the emotional resonance of the recorded events. The human experiences felt genuine, carrying the weight of real joy and suffering that would be impossible to fabricate. But the Alterans had developed psychological warfare techniques that could produce similar effects. The evidence was compelling, but not definitive. The deadlock was broken by an unexpected source. Both delegations received urgent messages from their home commands, reporting massive fleet movements on the other side of the border. The Alteron High Command was mobilizing their planet-killer weapons, while the Corvan Council was preparing to unleash their psychic warfare divisions. The peace treaty was being formally suspended, and both sides were demanding immediate withdrawal of their negotiators. Ray realized that the three-way talks had become a sideshow to the main event. While they debated the nature of human independence, both empires were preparing for a war that would make their previous conflicts look like peaceful disagreements. The weapons they were deploying were designed not for conquest but for extinction. Intended to eliminate the enemy species entirely, Foster made a desperate appeal to both sides, pointing out that the destruction of either civilization would be an irreplaceable loss for the galaxy. The Alterans and Corvins had developed unique technologies and cultures that would be lost forever if the war continued. But her words were dismissed as naive idealism by beings who had spent centuries learning to hate. The final session of the peace talks was a formality that satisfied no one. Vec and Voss performed the ritual dissolution of the treaty with the same ceremony they had used to create it 5 years earlier. The words were ancient and powerful, carrying the weight of tradition and the promise of renewal. But this time, there would be no renewal. The galaxy was choosing war over peace, and nothing could stop it. As the delegations prepared to leave the station, Ree made one last attempt to change their minds. He offered to submit to any test they could devise, to prove beyond doubt that humanity was exactly what it claimed to be. But the offer was rejected by both sides. The time for proof had passed, and the time for action had arrived. Blake monitored the tactical situation as the alien fleets began their final approach. The Alteran dreadnoughts moved with ponderous majesty, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The Corvin bioships flowed through space like living things, their organic architecture pulsing with barely contained energy. When they met, the resulting battle would be visible from a dozen star systems. Ray stood alone in the observation deck as the last shuttle departed, carrying the diplomats back to their respective fleets. The station's automated systems would maintain basic functions for a few more days, then shut down as the battle lines were drawn. Haven's rest would become another casualty of the war, its purpose forgotten in the rush to destroy the enemy. The irony was not lost on him, humanity. had dreamed of the day they would meet other intelligent species, imagining peaceful exchanges of knowledge and culture. Instead, their arrival had triggered the very war they had hoped to prevent. The galaxy was about to tear itself apart, and the humans were helpless to stop it, but Ray Wells was not ready to give up. As the alien fleets moved toward their final confrontation, he began to formulate a desperate plan. If diplomacy had failed, perhaps there was another way to prevent the war. It would require sacrifice and courage, but it might be the only chance to save both civilizations from their own hatred. The human ship Wanderer powered up its engines and began moving toward the battle zone. Rhea had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The war room aboard the Wanderer had been transformed into something that would have terrified any military strategist in human space. Wall displays showed the deployment patterns of two massive alien fleets, their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Communication intercepts revealed battle plans that spoke of total victory and absolute destruction. Dr. Foster had stopped sleeping, her eyes red from staring at tactical data that grew more horrifying by the hour. Ray Wells stood at the center of it all, his mind racing through possibilities that ranged from desperate to suicidal. The human ship was alone in the neutral zone, caught between forces that could destroy it without noticing. But being small and insignificant also meant being invisible, and invisibility was exactly what Ray needed for his plan to work. Tom Blake had spent 3 days modifying the Wanderer's systems for operations they were never designed to handle. The ship's computer cores were now running advanced decryption programs that could break alien military codes in real time. The communication array had been boosted to penetrate deep space networks without triggering security systems. Most importantly, the navigation computer had been loaded with detailed maps of both empires' strategic infrastructure. The first phase of Ray's plan was pure espionage. The Wanderer began intercepting and analyzing every piece of military traffic between the two fleets, building a comprehensive picture of their battle plans and tactical capabilities. The humans discovered that both sides were preparing for a war of extinction, using weapons that had been banned even during the height of their previous conflict. Foster worked through the intercepted communications with growing horror. The Alteron High Command had authorized the use of their remaining planet-killer weapons, massive devices that could crack the crust of a world and boil away its atmosphere. The target list included every major Corvan breeding colony, ensuring that the species would face extinction within a generation. The Corvan war plans were equally devastating. Their psychic warfare divisions were preparing to unleash a mental plague that would drive all Alterans insane, turning their own cognitive abilities against them. The weapon was designed to be self-replicating, spreading through telepathic contact until every member of the species was affected. Both civilizations were planning genocide on a scale that made their previous wars look like minor skirmishes. Blake discovered that the key to both battle plans was precise timing. The Alterans needed to coordinate their planet-killer strikes to prevent the Corvans from retaliating, while the Corvans had to synchronize their psychic attacks to overwhelm Alteran mental defenses. If either side's timing was disrupted, their advantage would disappear and the war would become a mutual slaughter. Ray realized that humanity's unique position gave them an unexpected advantage. Neither side considered the human ship a threat, which meant they could operate freely in areas that would be heavily defended against each other. The Wanderer could intercept communications, disrupt supply lines, and interfere with military operations without triggering immediate retaliation. The human solution was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to stop the war through diplomacy, they would prevent it from starting by sabotaging both sides' preparations. Ray divided his crew into specialized teams, each one responsible for a different aspect of the campaign. Foster would handle intelligence and communications. Blake would manage technical sabotage, and Ray would coordinate the overall operation. The first target was the Alteran communication network. Blake used the ship's modified transmitters to inject false data into their military channels, creating phantom fleet movements and non-existent supply shortages. The misinformation was subtle but effective. causing delays and confusion that threw off the carefully planned timetables. Foster focused on the Corven's psychic networks, using her understanding of their telepathic communication to introduce mental static that disrupted their coordination. The humans had discovered that certain electromagnetic frequencies could interfere with Corven thought processes, creating a kind of mental fog that made precise timing impossible. The sabotage campaign escalated as both sides struggled to understand what was happening to their military operations. Supply convoys were mysteriously rerouted, communication networks suffered random failures, and strategic databases were corrupted by unknown viruses. Each side blamed the other for the problems, creating additional confusion and mistrust. Ray's masterstroke was the cultural transmission campaign. While the military sabotage continued, the Wanderer began broadcasting human cultural materials across the galaxy on civilian frequencies. Music, art, literature, and philosophy flowed into both empires, carrying messages of hope and cooperation that stood in stark contrast to the war preparations. The cultural broadcasts had an unexpected effect on both civilizations. Alteron and Corvan civilians began to question why they were preparing for another war when the galaxy clearly contained wonders they had never imagined. The human materials showed a species that had overcome its own destructive tendencies, learning to cooperate instead of compete. Foster realized that the cultural campaign was more effective than the military sabotage. The broadcasts were creating doubt and dissent within both empires as ordinary citizens began to wonder if there might be alternatives to eternal conflict. The timing was perfect. Just as the war machine was building momentum, the population was losing faith in its necessity. Blake discovered that the sabotage was having cascading effects throughout both military hierarchies. Commanders were questioning their orders, logistics officers were reporting impossible supply problems, and intelligence analysts were finding contradictions in their data. The careful choreography of genocide was breaking down into chaos and confusion. The breakthrough came when both sides began detecting evidence of the human interference. Military intelligence units on both sides started tracking the mysterious communication disruptions and supply failures back to their source. The pattern was clear. Someone was actively sabotaging their war preparations, and the only unknown factor was the human ship. Ray realized that discovery was inevitable, but he had achieved his primary objective. The war had been delayed long enough for both sides to begin questioning their own motivations. The cultural broadcasts had planted seeds of doubt that were growing into full-scale dissent. The carefully planned genocide was becoming politically impossible as public opinion shifted against the war. The final phase of the plan was the most dangerous. Ray ordered the Wanderer to emerge from hiding and broadcast a message directly to both fleets. The transmission was simple but devastating, a complete record of the sabotage campaign, showing exactly how the humans had prevented the war from starting. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Both sides realized they had been outmaneuvered by a single alien ship, their mighty fleets rendered impotent by superior strategy and determination. The humiliation was complete, but it was also liberating. If the humans could prevent the war, perhaps they could also help create a lasting peace. Foster prepared for the consequences of their revelation. Both empires would demand explanations, and the answers would have to be convincing enough to prevent retaliation. The cultural broadcasts had prepared the ground, but the real test would come when the military commanders realized the full scope of human capabilities. Blake monitored the fleet movements as both sides processed the implications of the human message. The war machine was grinding to a halt, but whether it would restart or transform into something else remained to be seen. The galaxy stood at a crossroads, and humanity had forced it to choose a different path. Ray looked out at the stars and prepared for the most important negotiation in galactic history. The war had been prevented, but the peace would have to be built from scratch. Humanity had proven they could stop a conflict, but now they would have to prove they could create something better to replace it. The surrender came not with fanfare but with exhaustion. Dr. Foster stepped out of the medical bay, aboard the Alteron flagship, her arms marked with the gentle restraints that had held her during 3 days of intensive biological analysis. The alien doctors had been thorough but not cruel, their multiple eyes reflecting genuine scientific curiosity rather than hostility. Behind her, the medical data that would change everything was being transmitted to the Corvan fleet. Engineer Tom Blake emerged from the Corvan bioship at the same moment, his mind still reeling from the psychic probes that had examined every corner of his consciousness. The experience had been invasive but not violent, the alien telepaths treating his memories with the respect due to a valuable scientific specimen. The convergent evidence from both examinations was traveling through space at light speed, carrying proof that could no longer be denied. Ray Wells waited aboard the Wanderer as the galaxy processed the truth. The genetic analysis showed that humans were biologically distinct from both species, with DNA that had evolved independently on a distant world. The psychic examination revealed minds that were genuine and unmodified, carrying authentic memories of a civilization that had developed without outside influence. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Ambassador Thek received the medical reports with the composure of a veteran diplomat, but his inner arms trembled with emotions he had not felt in decades. The humans were real. Their independence was genuine. Their intervention in the war preparations had been motivated by simple moral principle rather than hidden allegiance. The implications were staggering and transformative. Chancellor Voss coiled around her command throne as the psychic analysis flooded through the Corvan collective consciousness. The human mind was unlike anything they had encountered, lacking telepathic abilities but possessing a resilience and creativity that was remarkable. The species had overcome global wars and environmental disasters through cooperation and innovation, proving that peaceful coexistence was possible. The revelation shattered both civilizations' understanding of themselves and their place in the universe. For centuries, they had defined their existence in opposition to each other, believing they were the only two intelligent species in the galaxy. The discovery of humanity forced them to confront the possibility that the universe was far larger and more complex than they had imagined. Foster returned to the Wanderer physically exhausted but spiritually energized. The medical examination had been an ordeal, but the results were worth the sacrifice. The Alteron scientists had found no evidence of genetic manipulation or artificial enhancement. Her human physiology was genuine, evolved through millions of years of natural selection on a world that neither empire had ever seen. Blake shared similar feelings about his experience with the Corvan psychic probes. The telepathic examination had been uncomfortable but thorough, revealing the authentic structure of human consciousness. The Corvans had found no false memories or mental conditioning, only the genuine experiences of a species that had learned to think for itself. The breakthrough came when both sides began to analyze the implications of their discoveries. If humans were genuinely independent, then their intervention in the war preparations took on an entirely different meaning. They had not been acting as agents of either empire, but as neutral parties trying to prevent a galactic catastrophe. Ray proposed a new approach to the crisis during the emergency conference that followed the medical revelations. Instead of resuming the war or returning to the fragile peace treaty, he suggested creating something entirely new, a three-way alliance that would address the root causes of the conflict. Rather than just managing its symptoms, the proposal was radical beyond anything either side had considered. Instead of maintaining the balance of terror that had characterized their relationship, they would create institutions designed to prevent future wars. The alliance would be based on mutual benefit rather than mutual destruction, with humanity serving as neutral mediators and guarantors of the peace. Thek found himself considering possibilities that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. The Alteron Empire had been built on the assumption that eternal conflict was inevitable, that strength came only through opposition to equally powerful enemies. The human proposal suggested that strength could come through cooperation, that former enemies could become partners in a larger endeavor. Voss reached similar conclusions through her psychic connection to the Corvan collective. The species had suffered through centuries of war, their mental networks scarred by the trauma of constant conflict. The human example showed that it was possible to overcome such trauma, to build a civilization based on hope rather than fear. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Three species with radically different biologies and cultures attempted to create a framework for permanent cooperation. The challenges were enormous: different concepts of law, incompatible social structures, and communication barriers that went beyond simple language differences. Foster became the first human ambassador to an alien civilization. Her experience with the medical examination having given her unique insights into both species' psychology. She worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps between radically different worldviews, finding common ground in shared values of survival and prosperity. Blake led the technical teams that would make the alliance possible. The three species' technologies were complementary in unexpected ways, with human innovation filling gaps that neither empire had been able to address alone. The collaborative projects became symbols of what could be achieved through cooperation. Rather than competition, the Treaty of New Horizons was signed exactly 1 year after the human arrival, in the same conference room where the previous peace treaty had been dissolved. But this document was fundamentally different from its predecessor. Instead of simply ending hostilities, it created institutions designed to prevent them from ever starting again. The Galactic Council would have representatives from all three species, with decisions requiring consensus rather than majority rule. Found himself transformed from explorer to peacekeeper as he accepted command of the new Alliance fleet. The ships under his command came from all three species, their crews working together in ways that would have been impossible during the war years. The sight of human, Alteran, and Corvan officers sharing the same bridge was a powerful symbol of how much had changed. The price of peace became clear as humanity assumed its new role in galactic affairs. Their days as free explorers were over, replaced by the heavier burden of maintaining stability between former enemies. Earth's colonies would become neutral territories, hosting diplomatic missions and serving as meeting grounds for interspecies cooperation. Foster established the first human embassy on the Alteran capital world, her diplomatic compound serving as a bridge between species that had barely learned to trust each other. The cultural exchange programs she developed became essential tools for preventing the kind of misunderstandings that had nearly triggered another war. Blake's technical innovations revolutionized all three civilizations. Human manufacturing techniques improved Alteran efficiency, while Corvan biotechnology enhanced human medicine. The collaborative research projects produced breakthroughs that none of the species could have achieved alone, creating bonds of mutual dependence that made future conflicts increasingly unlikely. The transformation was not without cost. Hardliners in both empires resented the human influence, viewing the alliance as a betrayal of their species' independence. Terrorist attacks and political assassinations plagued the early years of the peace, forcing the new institutions to prove their resilience under pressure. Thek evolved from warrior to statesman, his multiple arms now signing trade agreements instead of battle orders. The former admiral found unexpected satisfaction in building rather than destroying, his strategic skills proving equally valuable. In peace and war, the Ultra military was transformed from an instrument of conquest into a force for galactic stability. Voss became the spiritual leader of the new alliance, her psychic abilities helping to resolve conflicts before they could escalate into violence. The Corvan collective consciousness adapted to include human and Alteran perspectives, creating a mental network that spanned three species and hundreds of worlds. The greatest challenge came from within humanity itself. Many Earth colonies resented being drawn into alien conflicts, arguing that humanity should focus on its own expansion rather than playing referee between ancient enemies. The political debates were fierce and sometimes violent, as human society struggled to adapt to its new galactic responsibilities. Ray addressed these concerns during his final speech as a free captain, delivered from the Bridge of the Wanderer before it was reassigned to peacekeeping duties. He spoke of sacrifice and responsibility, of the price that came with being part of something larger than any single species. The galaxy was finally at peace, but it would require constant vigilance to keep it that way. The epilogue to the crisis came 5 years later, when the first generation of children born after the Alliance reached school age. Human, Alteran, and Corvin youngsters played together in integrated classrooms, their games reflecting cooperation rather than conflict. These children would grow up in a galaxy where war between the three species was literally unthinkable. The Wanderer's final mission took it back to the edge of human space, where new worlds waited to be explored and catalogued. But the ship no longer flew alone. Its escort included vessels from all three Alliance species, their crews working together to push back the boundaries of known space. The age of isolated exploration was over, replaced by something more complex but ultimately more rewarding. Ray stood on the bridge of his new flagship, watching the stars wheel by at faster than light speeds. The galaxy was at peace, but peace had come with a price that humanity would be paying for generations to come. They had traded their freedom to explore for the responsibility to maintain order, their independence for the chance to prevent another galactic war. Looking back at the chain of events that had brought him to this moment, Ray wondered if he would make the same choices again. The answer came easily. The price of peace was worth paying, even if it meant sacrificing the dreams that had first brought humanity to the stars. The galaxy was safer now, and sometimes safety was more important than freedom. The human species had found its place in the galactic community, not as conquerors or explorers, but as peacemakers and bridges between worlds that might otherwise destroy each other. It was not the destiny they had imagined when they first reached for the stars, but it was perhaps the most important role they could play in the vast theater of cosmic civilization.